My name is Camille L. Tran. I am 31 years old, and if you had asked me a year ago what kind of person I was, I would have told you I was the type who kept her distance, paid her bills on time, and avoided family drama like it was a contagious disease. I thought that was what boundaries looked like. Now I know better. Boundaries aren't just distance. Sometimes they are a line in the sand you decide nobody is allowed to cross again, even if it means burning every bridge behind you. When my dad called and told me he had booked me a flight home so we could reconnect as a family, I wanted to believe him. We hadn't had an actual conversation in years, not since I moved across the country and downgraded our relationship to polite small talk and occasional bank transfers. I assumed someone was sick or something terrible had happened. That was the only reason I agreed. The moment my plane landed, any illusion I had started to fall apart. I walked through the arrivals gate, dragging my carry-on behind me, expecting my father, or maybe my mom. Instead, I saw my brother, face lit up, waving, and before I could even set my suitcase down, he shoved a diaper bag into my arms. "We're off to Europe," he said, grinning like this was a punchline. "Just be with them." That was it. No discussion, no heads up, no asking. Just the automatic assumption that I, the supposedly free and flexible sister who flew into Reconnect, would naturally stay behind as unpaid childcare while he and his new girlfriend drank wine in Italy and posed for pictures in front of old buildings. I looked down at the bag in my hands, at the bottles sticking out of the side pocket, at the smear of something crusted on the strap. The kids were slumped nearby, surrounded by a small mountain of suitcases. They stared at me with tired, wary eyes. The youngest still had a dried streak of cereal on her cheek. I hadn't seen them in a couple of years, but their names came back in a rush, like a half-remembered song. Ellie, Jonah, little Sophie. I remembered holidays when their mom, Kelly, used to bring them over before everything between her and my brother exploded. Back then, my parents acted like Kelly was temporary, replaceable. Eventually, she just stopped coming. I thought she'd moved on. I thought everyone had. They left that same evening. My parents stood in the driveway like proud handlers, waving my brother and his new girlfriend off as if they were sending royalty to Europe. No one turned to look at me, standing there with 3 kids who barely knew me, a diaper bag, and a quickly unraveling story about reconnecting. No one explained why the kids weren't going, why they couldn't be included in the trip, or how long my brother and his girlfriend would be gone. I guessed a week, maybe 2. I didn't ask. I just swallowed the question and the anger with it. That night, I sat on the couch with the kids, a movie flickering on the TV while my phone buzzed in my hand. I texted a friend about the ambush, fingers flying over the screen. I typed that I had been tricked into becoming a live-in nanny and that my family hadn't changed at all, just gotten better at disguising their selfishness as tradition. Jonah fell asleep with his head on my shoulder halfway through the movie. His small weight against me made everything suddenly, painfully real. It hit me then that this wasn't about reconnection. It was about convenience. It was about them. It was never about me. The next morning, I went looking for coffee and instead found the truth. In the kitchen drawer, under a stack of takeout menus and old batteries, there was a folder labeled Europe Trip Itinerary. I opened it and felt my stomach turn. 2 weeks in Italy. Flights, rental cars, restaurant reservations, little color printouts of landmarks. They had been planning this for months. Every detail accounted for, except apparently who would take care of the kids in a way that wasn't exploitative. Tucked behind the folder was a crumpled envelope with my brother's name on it. I almost threw it away. Curiosity won. Inside was a letter, handwritten, dated 6 months earlier. The return address belonged to someone I hadn't heard about in a very long time, Kelly. She wrote that she missed the kids, that she was still in the same town, living with her mother, trying to get back on her feet. She admitted she'd messed up by not fighting harder in court, said she couldn't afford a lawyer, and that every try ended with someone telling her she didn't have a case. She wrote that she hadn't seen the children in 4 months because my brother refused to let her visit, refused to even let her hear their voices. She begged him to let her talk to them. Just talk. I read the letter twice. By the 3rd time, I realized my hands were shaking. There was a version of me that would have folded that letter back up, tucked it away, and told herself it was none of my business. The same version that had been sending money for years and pretending that made me neutral. That version of me was done. I waited until my brother and his girlfriend were well into their second day in Rome, judging by the timestamps on his smug social media posts. The kids were on the carpet playing with a pile of mismatched blocks, humming to themselves. I packed their things without telling them why. Clothes, toothbrushes, the worn-out stuffed animal Sophie refused to let go of. I didn't leave a note. I didn't text my parents. I didn't inform my brother. I buckled each child carefully into the back of the rental car, checked the straps twice, and started driving. My heart pounded hard enough to feel in my teeth, but my hands were steady. It took 4 hours to reach the town Kelly had mentioned in the letter. I didn't know if she still lived there. Some part of me felt certain she hadn't gone far. At the first grocery store I saw, I walked in, approached the clerk, and asked if they knew a woman named Kelly who had 3 kids and a tired smile. The clerk's eyes softened. "Yeah," they said, "I know her." That was all I needed. By the time I pulled up to the address, my throat felt tight. The house was small, paint peeling in places, the front steps slightly crooked. Kelly opened the door after the second knock. For a moment, she just stood there, blinking like her brain refused to connect what she was seeing. Then she saw the kids behind me. She didn't scream or collapse. She simply dropped to her knees on the threshold and pulled them in one by one, holding on like the world might end if she let go. Her mother appeared in the doorway behind her, hand covering her mouth, eyes wide and wet. That night, I slept on their couch. The kids were curled up in sleeping bags on the floor, closer to their mom than they'd been allowed in months, maybe years. They looked more peaceful than they had since the moment I stepped off that plane. Around midnight, sitting in the dim light of a secondhand lamp, I finally picked up my phone and texted my brother. "The kids are with their mother," I wrote. "I'm staying here until you get back. Do not call me." He called anyway. Then my parents. Then his girlfriend. My screen lit up over and over, a digital storm I refused to step into. I didn't answer. I watched the missed calls climb into double digits, then triple. Somewhere under the fear and adrenaline, something else started to form. For the first time in my life, I was doing something my family truly did not expect. And I knew, with a clarity that scared me, that this was only the beginning. By the next morning, the calls had turned into a steady assault. My phone buzzed on the coffee table while I poured cereal, while Kelly brewed weak coffee in the kitchen, while the kids argued over which cartoon to watch. I kept flipping it face down like that could mute the chaos on the other end of the line. The first message that made it through was from my dad. Something short and stiff. "We need to talk when you have a minute." As if I had just forgotten to call home. As if I hadn't just relocated his grandchildren without permission and detonated months of secret planning. I stared at the screen, felt my jaw tighten, then set the phone aside without replying. A few minutes later, my brother's name lit up the top of the screen, followed by a wall of messages that stacked on top of each other so quickly it looked like my phone was glitching. He started out with forced calm, calling this a huge misunderstanding, saying he and his girlfriend were confused, that they didn't understand what I was doing, that we could sort it out when he got back. I scrolled past the fake concern and saw the edge creeping in. All caps words, question marks, accusations. I turned the phone off and tucked it under a couch cushion. I wasn't ready for his voice, not yet. Later, while the kids colored at the kitchen table and Kelly tried to make space in a cabinet for the extra groceries I'd picked up, I stepped outside and called my boyfriend. He answered on the second ring. "I was starting to wonder if you'd fallen off the planet," he said. "How's the reconnecting going?" I laughed, but there wasn't anything funny in it. I told him everything in one long, breathless spill. The diaper bag at the airport, the hidden itinerary, the letter from Kelly, the midnight drive, the reunion on the porch. There was a long silence when I finished. "Camille," he said finally, voice low, "this is a lot." "I know. How long are you staying?" The question hung there like a weight. I could hear my own silence, could feel the answer shifting under my feet. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "Long enough to make sure he doesn't just swoop in and rip them away again." He sighed. I could picture him in his apartment, rubbing his temples, that tired look he got when work emails piled up. "You can't fix your entire family in one trip." "I'm not trying to fix them," I said. "I'm trying to protect the only people in this mess who didn't choose any of it." He was quiet again. Then he said, "If you're going to do this, talk to someone who actually knows the system. Remember Marina? His ex, the one who specialized in family law. I'd never met her, but I knew the name, knew the way his voice changed when he mentioned the cases she used to talk about. That little twist of irony wasn't lost on me. She'd know what matters in court, he continued. What to document, what not to say. I can reach out if you want. It doesn't have to be weird. I stared at the cracked concrete of the front step. If she's willing to help, I'm not in a position to be picky, I said. Ask her what we need to do. After I hung up, I went back inside and turned my phone on long enough to send one text. Not to my dad, not to my mother, to my brother. They're with Kelly, I wrote. Don't come here. The calls stopped for a few hours after that. I pictured them thousands of miles away, huddled around some rental car dashboard screen or hotel bed, scrambling, arguing, trying to strategize. My family didn't like being surprised. They liked being the ones in control. By late afternoon, the silence broke. I saw his car before I heard it, the familiar shape pulling into the narrow driveway, gravel crunching under the tires. I was standing at the kitchen sink when the headlights swept across the wall. He's here, I said quietly. Kelly froze with a dish towel in her hands. What do we do? I put the towel down, wiped my palms on my jeans, and walked toward the front door. You stay inside with the kids, I said. Let me talk to him first. The air outside was sharp and cooler than I expected. My brother sat in the car for a few seconds just staring at the house. Then he opened the door and climbed out, slamming it harder than necessary. He didn't say anything at first. He just shook his head slowly, like I was a piece of malfunctioning equipment he couldn't quite fix. You really did this, he said finally. His voice was low, already simmering. You actually took them. I stood on the porch step, every muscle in my body buzzing. I brought them to their mother, I said. You left them like luggage and flew to another continent. I picked them up. He stepped closer, eyes flashing. You have no idea what you've done. You don't know what she's like. She doesn't have a job. She can't afford anything. She lives with her mother. You think this, he gestured toward the house, is better? I let him talk. Let him lay out his rehearsed list of her failures like he was delivering a closing argument. No mention of the blocked calls. No mention of the letter begging to hear her own children's voices. He painted her as weak, irresponsible, unstable. Are you done? I asked when he finally stopped for air. For a moment he looked thrown. Excuse me? She made mistakes, I said. She's paying for them. But that doesn't mean you get to erase her and lock the kids away like they're yours alone. She has rights. His mouth curled. You've been here, what, 2 days? And you think you understand everything? I understand enough, I said. I've seen the emails, the messages you ignored, the ones you twisted to make it look like harassment. She kept everything. He took another step, close enough that I could see the tiny wrinkle between his eyebrows he'd had since he was a teenager. You're out of your depth, Camille. Put them in the car. We'll talk about this like adults after we're back home. The kids aren't going anywhere with you, I said. My voice surprised even me with how calm it sounded. Kelly has just as much right to them as you do, and she's not going to fight alone this time. He laughed, short and sharp. What are you going to do? Lecture me until I surrender? I already called a lawyer, I said. If you try to take them by force, we'll file for emergency custody. We'll show everything you've done, every blocked visit, every lie, and we're not doing it over text. We'll do it in front of a judge. For the first time since he stepped out of the car, his expression cracked. You wouldn't. I already have, I said, and I'm not the only one. You're not the only person in this family who can hire representation. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something else, then shut it again. I watched the calculations flicker behind his eyes. He stepped back slowly, shaking his head. You're going to regret this, he muttered. Maybe, I said, but I can live with regretting that I tried to do the right thing. I can't live with regretting that I kept looking away. He didn't call the police. He didn't drag the kids out screaming. He just turned around, walked back to his car, and drove off. I watched the taillights disappear down the street and only then realized my hands were shaking. Inside, Kelly was sitting at the kitchen table, fingers clenched around a mug of coffee gone cold. What did he say? She asked. That it's war now, I said, which means we stop pretending it's not. Over the next few days, she told me everything she'd been holding in her chest for years. How he'd convinced her to quit her job to focus on the kids, then slowly cut her off from their finances. How every argument turned into a threat about taking the children away, about how no one would believe her if she spoke up, how he'd told the kids she abandoned them, that she chose to leave. She showed me her emails, the ones begging just to see them on holidays, just to video chat on birthdays. The responses were cold, dismissive, or missing entirely. There were messages he'd forwarded to my parents with his own captions attached, calling her unstable and obsessed. I listened until my throat burned. Every story scraped against years of my own quiet complicity. I had been wiring money home, telling myself I was helping, that I was above the drama. But that money had helped build the cage he'd put around them. That night, while the kids slept in a tangled pile of blankets on the living room floor, I sat on the couch with my laptop open. My return flight details glowed softly on the screen. One click and I could change everything back, go home, pretend this was just a weird detour. I opened the airline website, pulled up my reservation, and hovered over the options. Instead of changing the date, I canceled the flight altogether. No refund, just a clean cut. Then I emailed my boss. I told her there had been a family situation that needed more than a long weekend, that I would understand if they needed to find coverage. But I couldn't leave yet. There was a long pause before her reply came in. She wrote that she didn't know the details, but she trusted my judgment, to keep her updated. When I finally closed my laptop, the house was quiet. Kelly was asleep in her room. The kids were breathing softly in the dark. My phone was face down, buzzing with messages I refused to read. I stared at the ceiling and whispered to no one in particular, "I'm staying." The words settled over me, like a weight and a strange, fierce relief, all at once. The next morning began quietly, almost deceptively so. The kids woke up sticky-haired and warm from sleep, padding into the kitchen one by one with their pajamas twisted around them. Kelly flipped pancakes with a kind of shaky focus, as if keeping her hands busy was the only thing preventing her thoughts from unraveling. I helped pour juice, tie loose hair, straighten wrinkled collars. The simple domestic routine softened the sharp edges of everything, at least for a moment. But the silence didn't last. My phone lit up again, this time with a message from my father. He wrote that we needed a family meeting, that this nonsense had gone far enough. His tone had shifted from vague disappointment to quiet authority, the same voice he used when my brother and I were children, the one that used to end every argument. I deleted the message without responding. A part of me still expected guilt to surge up through my chest, but instead there was just space. A widening space that made room for a new thought, that maybe obedience wasn't the same thing as love, and distance wasn't the same thing as betrayal. Around mid-morning, Kelly sat down across from me at the table and exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for hours. "I feel like they're going to come take them," she said. Her voice wavered. "Just show up at the door and take them." I looked at her, at the dark circles under her eyes, at the way her fingers curled protectively whenever one of the kids walked by. "Not if I can help it," I said. "Not anymore." We spent the afternoon making lists, not emotional ones, practical ones. The kids needed clothes that actually fit. Winter coats, shoes without holes in the soles, toothbrushes that weren't frayed, school supplies, medical forms, legal documents, a mountain of things that should never have fallen on Kelly alone. I drove us to the store. We filled carts with clothes, backpacks, snacks, toiletries. I stood in line with a stack of items so tall the cashier blinked at me twice before scanning anything. When we left, Kelly whispered, "Thank you," like it hurt to say it. On the drive back, Jonah asked from the back seat, "Are we staying here forever?" Kelly's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. Before she could answer, I turned and met his eyes. "You're staying with your mom for a while," I said gently. "Longer than before, longer than you think." He considered that. "Is Dad mad?" "He's confused," I said, "but that's not your job to fix." He nodded slowly as if the idea was new. When we got back to the house, Kelly's mother had set out snacks and started organizing the bags of clothes. The kids tore into their new things like it was Christmas morning. I watched them flit around the living room, trying on coats and holding up shirts to their bodies. In that moment, the war with my family felt far away, almost unreal. It didn't stay that way. That evening, my phone buzzed again. An unknown number I recognized immediately. My mother. I didn't answer, but the voicemail transcribed itself on the screen. She was crying, saying I had embarrassed them, that I was destroying my brother's relationship, that his girlfriend had cut her trip short because of the drama. She said people were asking questions. She said this was all my fault. I listened, then hit delete. Kelly sat across from me at the table, folding laundry into uneven piles. "Did they say something?" she asked carefully. "They always say something," I replied. "I'm done listening." The weight of that statement didn't hit me until later. I had been supporting my family financially for years, quietly, consistently. covering bills, sending monthly deposits, paying for things they couldn't. I had justified it as helping. But really, it was a leash, and they'd pulled it every chance they got. The next morning, before anyone else was awake, I logged into my bank account and canceled every recurring payment tied to my parents. Mortgage assistance, my mother's monthly wellness stipend, streaming services, grocery transfers, all of it. Money wasn't love. It had never been love. It was control disguised as generosity, and I was done letting them use either word against me. 3 days after my father demanded the family meeting, the sound of gravel crunching outside jolted me from washing dishes. I looked out the window and saw a rental SUV pulling into the driveway. "Oh God," Kelly whispered behind me. My brother stepped out first, then my father, then my mother, wearing the tight-lipped expression of someone preparing to win an argument by volume alone. Kelly backed away from the window, trembling. "Stay with the kids," I said. "I'll handle this." I walked out onto the porch before they had a chance to knock. The morning air was cold, but I barely felt it. My family stood there like they were reclaiming stolen property. No one spoke at first. My father adjusted his jacket, trying to look composed. My mother looked furious enough to shatter glass. My brother wore aviator sunglasses like this was some kind of power move. Finally, my dad cleared his throat. "Camille, are you really going through with this?" "Yes," I said. My mother jumped in. "You have no right to interfere in a legal family matter." "I'm family," I said. "And what you did wasn't parenting. It was abandonment dressed up as a vacation." My brother ripped off his sunglasses. "You're manipulating her," he snapped. "You're brainwashing the kids. This is about you getting back at me. Don't pretend it isn't." I laughed out loud. Actually laughed. The sound surprised us all. "I'm not afraid of you," I said. "Not anymore. And I'm done letting you use people and call it responsibility." My father stepped forward. "You can't decide who's a fit parent." "You're right," I said calmly, "but a judge can." That landed like a stone. My brother's expression twisted. My mother gasped sharply. My father's jaw tensed. "We've filed for custody modification," I said. "Kelly has representation. The kids are in school. They're safe. They're doing better than they have in months." My mother's face went red. "You've ruined this family." "No," I said softly. "I'm saving the part worth keeping." No one responded. They just turned and walked back to the SUV. My brother tried to slam the door and missed the latch. My mother gave me a look of pure betrayal, as if I had broken something sacred by refusing to obey. I didn't watch them leave. I turned back toward the house where Kelly stood in the doorway, eyes shining with tears she wasn't letting fall. Inside, the kids were sprawled on the floor, coloring with their new crayons. Jonah looked up. "Are they gone?" "Yes," I said. "Good," he whispered. Later that night, after dishes were washed and the kids were tucked into bed, we sat at the table, me, Kelly, and her mother. The house hummed with quiet. "I'm ready to go all in," I said. "Full legal support, financial backing, whatever it takes. We're not letting them take the kids back." Kelly stared at me, overwhelmed. "How far are you willing to go?" I felt the answer settle in my chest, like a stone sinking to the bottom of a lake. I already passed the point of no return. And I meant it. For the first time in my life, I wasn't standing on the sidelines. I was choosing a side, and I was willing to burn every bridge behind me to protect the people who had never been protected by anyone. The next few days settled into an uneasy rhythm, like the eye of a storm that refused to move on. Mornings were chaotic but sweet. Sophie dragging her blanket into the kitchen, Jonah half awake and grumpy until pancakes appeared, Ellie reading quietly at the table, while Kelly packed lunches with a kind of determined tenderness. For short stretches of time, it almost felt normal. Almost. But every time my phone buzzed, the illusion cracked. Every vibration felt like a warning, a reminder that the peace we had built was temporary and fragile, like glass balanced on the edge of a table. Still, we pushed forward. The kids started their new school. Kelly met with our lawyer. I began building binders of documentation, messages, financial records, school reports, screenshots, everything our attorney said we would need. For a moment, I thought we had found a small pocket of safety until the school called. I had just finished folding laundry when my phone rang. The number belonged to the elementary school. For a split second, I thought one of the kids was sick, but the principal's voice was strange. Too level, too careful. "Ms. Tran, we need you to come to the school right away," he said. "Jonah is safe, but there was an incident." My stomach dropped. I grabbed my keys and was out the door before the principal finished speaking. Kelly followed close behind, her face pale. When we arrived, the principal ushered us into his office. Jonah sat in a chair, swinging his legs, looking small and confused. A woman came in, the principal explained. She claimed to be a family friend and said she was supposed to pick Jonah up early. Kelly gasped. We follow protocol here, he continued quickly. She wasn't on the approved list, and Jonah didn't recognize her, so we refused to release him. Do you know what she looked like? I asked, though dread was already curling in my stomach. He described her, long dark hair, sunglasses, expensive coat. My heart sank. My brother's girlfriend, the one who supposedly left him in Italy over the drama. Kelly covered her mouth, shaking, not from fear this time, but from pure, hot rage. How did they know where the kids go to school? She whispered. I didn't have an answer, but I had a terrifying guess. Someone was watching, digging, tracking. When we got back to the house, I checked my email. A single new message sat at the top, sent from my dad. You're turning them against their father. You're making this worse. Short, blunt, ominous. It confirmed everything. The attempted pickup wasn't a coincidence. It was a message, a warning, a line drawn. That night, after the kids were asleep and Kelly finally stopped pacing long enough to sit down, I made a decision, a big one. We can't stay here, I said quietly. Not right now. Kelly looked at me, wary. What do you mean? I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I reached a name I hadn't touched in years. Someone who owed me a favor from college. Someone who lived far enough away to make us disappear for a while. I mean, we're leaving tomorrow morning, I said. All of us. No explanations, no warnings, just action. At dawn, we packed bags. Essentials only. Clothes, medications, school papers, snacks. The kids were groggy and confused, but they didn't ask many questions. They trusted us. That alone was enough to break my heart. We drove 6 hours north to Vermont, deep into the kind of quiet that only exists around lakes and pine trees. My friend's cabin sat at the edge of the water, tucked away behind evergreens that swayed like they were guarding us. No neighbors, no traffic, no internet unless you climbed onto the porch and held your phone at a precise angle. The kids thought it was a surprise vacation. They chased each other along the rocky shore, collected pine cones, and built castles out of sand and moss. Kelly sat on the porch steps, hunched over with her elbows on her knees, finally breathing like her lungs weren't trapped in a vice. For 5 days, there was no shouting, no threats, no lawyers, no voicemails screaming through the phone speaker. Just silence and the soft slap of water against the shore. For 5 days, we were a makeshift family suspended outside of time. Then, on the 6th morning, Kelly walked back from the mailbox holding a manila envelope between her fingers, like it was covered in poison. No return address, she said. Her voice trembled. Inside was a copy of a custody petition from my brother. Thick, stapled, official. It accused Kelly of abandonment, mental instability, manipulation. It accused me of interfering with parental rights, using old social media posts, blurry photos of me at college parties, even an ancient joke captioned under a picture of me holding someone's baby. Please take it back. They were reaching hard, but the message was clear. They weren't going to stop. They weren't going to back down. They weren't going to play fair. I didn't wait. I loaded everyone into the car and drove straight back to town. The minute we got in, I went to the courthouse and filed for a restraining order on behalf of the kids, citing the attempted school pickup. Our lawyer met us there, her eyes sharp, her tone steady. It won't last forever, she warned, but it will buy us time. That night, Kelly broke down, not in panic, but in heartbreak. I can't lose them again, she whispered. I can't go back to that life. I'd rather disappear. I didn't let her finish the sentence. I went to the guest room, pulled open the desk drawer, and took out a check I had written days earlier, waiting for the right moment. I placed it on the kitchen table in front of her. $15,000. For a fresh start, I said, a real one. She shook her head immediately. Camille, no, I can't take that. That's too much. It's not even close to what he took from you, I said. And it's not charity. It's a reset button. She tried to push it back. I refused. The next morning, I made another decision, one I should have made years ago. I changed my phone number. Then I logged into my accounts and cut off every automatic payment I had been sending to my parents, mortgage contributions, grocery transfers, the monthly vitamin allowance my mother insisted she needed, even the streaming services. Gone. That night, my brother left a voicemail. I didn't listen to the whole thing, but I caught the start. "You're going to regret this, Camille. You have no idea who you're messing with." He was wrong. I knew exactly who I was messing with, and I wasn't scared of him anymore. The morning of the hearing arrived with the kind of heavy stillness that settles over a room before a storm breaks. Kelly sat beside me on the stiff wooden bench outside the courtroom, her hands clasped so tightly together her knuckles had gone white. She hadn't touched her coffee, hadn't spoken more than a few murmured words. She didn't need to. I could feel her fear vibrating through the small space between us. The kids were at her mother's house, safe, unaware, and we were about to walk into the moment that would decide whether that safety would last. Our lawyer arrived with 2 binders, thick, organized, color-tabbed, evidence we had spent weeks gathering, screenshots, messages, school statements, copies of financial transfers, documentation of missed calls, the timeline of Kelly's blocked attempts to see her children. The weight of it felt both reassuring and horrifying. It was a map of everything my brother had destroyed, one unreturned message at a time. Across the aisle, a man I'd never seen before slouched behind a small folder, my brother's lawyer. No binders, no boxes, no client. My brother hadn't shown up. Of course he hadn't. He never did like dealing with consequences face to face. The judge, a woman with sharp eyes and a calm, measured voice, called the case. We stood. Kelly's breath hitched. I squeezed her hand. She didn't let go. Our lawyer presented everything cleanly, fact by fact, without theatrics. The blocked messages, the withheld visits, the unexplained absence of the children's father, the attempt by his girlfriend to pick up Jonah from school under false pretenses, the financial evidence of control, the letter Kelly had written 6 months ago that my brother had never responded to. When Kelly spoke, she didn't cry. She didn't break. Her voice trembled, but it held. She admitted her mistakes. She admitted she had been overwhelmed, that she had been naive, that she had let fear keep her quiet. But she also said she never stopped loving her kids. She said she was ready, finally ready, to fight for them. Not out of anger, out of hope, out of responsibility, out of love. The judge listened with a stillness that made the room feel smaller. Then she turned to my brother's lawyer. "Is there a reason your client is not present for this hearing?" she asked. He adjusted his tie, fumbling. "He's out of state on business, Your Honor." The judge wrote something down with a slow, deliberate motion. A motion I knew meant everything. The ruling when it came was short, precise, irreversible. Full temporary custody to Kelly. Immediate placement with her. Supervised visitation only, and only upon review. A restraining order preventing my brother and his girlfriend from approaching the children or their school. Kelly stared at the floor, hands over her mouth. Then she whispered, "We did it." And for the first time since I arrived on that plane weeks ago, she looked like herself again, lighter, steadier, almost whole. We left the courthouse without saying a word to the other lawyer. He avoided eye contact anyway. I drove us back to this house. The afternoon sun scattered across the passenger seat, painting Kelly in gold. She held the ruling in her lap like it was something fragile, like it might crumble if she breathed too hard. When we picked up the kids from school, the world shifted. Ellie ran into Kelly's arms without hesitation. Sophie clung to her leg, laughing and crying at the same time. Jonah looked up at me with wide eyes. "Is it over?" he asked. "For now," I said. "But you're staying with your mom. That's not changing." He nodded slowly. Relief washed over his small face. "Good," he whispered. That evening, Kelly started a new list. This time, not of needs, but of plans. A real home, a routine, daycare options. A tiny backyard, if possible. A job schedule that made sense. She spoke with hope in her voice, something soft and new. Over the next week, I helped her find an apartment in a quiet neighborhood. Modest, but safe. Good schools. A community center nearby. I paid the first 3 months' rent and the deposit. Helped her find a used car with low mileage, reliable enough to last. Set her up with a laptop and printer for remote work applications. 2 weeks later, she landed a job. And the kids, they blossomed. Ellie joined a reading club. Jonah made the soccer team. Sophie set up an art corner in her new bedroom. Their laughter no longer sounded hesitant or borrowed. It sounded like it belonged to them. On my last night staying with them, the kids presented me with thank you cards. Sophie drew all of us holding hands under a giant sun. Jonah told me I made better pancakes than his dad ever had. Ellie gave me a tiny polished stone from the lake, the one she'd carried with her from the cabin, and whispered, "So you don't forget us." Later that night, after they were asleep, I handed Kelly another envelope. A second check, $15,000. Enough for furniture, savings, emergencies. Enough for a future not built on fear. She stared at it for a long time. "Is this your way of saying goodbye?" she asked softly. I shook my head. "No. It's my way of making sure you're never trapped again." The next morning, I packed my things. Kelly's mother hugged me like I was her own. Kelly didn't say much, but her eyes said everything. When I reached the car, Jonah ran outside barefoot to hand me a folded piece of paper. Inside were shaky letters. "Please come back soon." I drove home in silence. My apartment felt unfamiliar, like it belonged to someone else. My phone buzzed with 64 missed calls, dozens of emails, voicemails full of anger from my parents and brother. I deleted them without listening. But then I saw a different message, one from a cousin I barely spoke to. She wrote that she'd heard what happened, that she once saw Kelly years ago crying in a parking lot, that she wished someone had stepped in back then. She said she was glad someone finally had. She ended the email with a line that stayed with me. "They're angry because you ended the cycle. That's what real change does." 3 weeks later, I visited the kids again. Their apartment was warm and lived in, with framed photos on the walls and little shoes lined up neatly by the door. Kelly had started her part-time role. The kids were thriving, safe, happy. That was the moment I finally let myself cry. I'm not their mother. I never pretended to be, but I gave them something no one else had ever given them. A chance. And if my old family never speaks to me again, I can live with that, because I didn't ruin our family. I saved the part worth keeping.